True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
My findings are consistent with death due to asphyxiation. There's no question about that. We have a case in which a rope is tied around the neck and the neck shows significant injuries. There are fractures of the hyoid bone, which is a U-shaped bone under the jaw. Then comes the thyroid cartilage, the Adam's apple, and that's fractured. And then just below the thyroid cartilage is the first cartilaginous ring of the trachea. It's called the cricoid cartilage, and that too was fractured. Most of the time in suicidal hangings, you don't even get fractures. The death is caused by the pressure on the neck, blocking the blood supply, but you don't get a fracture of the cricoid cartilage, which is down here beneath your Adam's apple. The rope is up here. This group studied 234 cases of suicidal hanging. They did not find any case in which the cricoid cartilage beneath the Adam's apple was fractured in a suicidal hanging. Not one. Now, there was another very interesting finding reported by the medical examiner in the first autopsy. Adhesive type material was found on both calves. That's from them. They noted adhesive material, clearly indicative of tape having been applied to those anatomic parts. So the question I raised then and have repeatedly raised since then, where's the discarded tape? Why did she first put tape on and then she said, well, that doesn't work. I'm gonna forget about the tape and I'm gonna go back and tie it with the rope. No adhesive tape was ever found, so you have all these findings, and the most significant finding is the fact that Rebecca Zahau was nude. I do not recall, in my 56 years of experience in forensic pathology, a woman committing suicide naked. Whether carbon monoxide sitting in her home or in her car, whether shooting herself, whether stabbing herself, whether taking drugs, whether jumping from a building, whatever way you can commit suicide. I have spoken to some colleagues, none of them can recall such a case. So you have somebody who is completely nude, hands bound, feet bound, shirt wrapped around the neck, over the rope, stuffed into her mouth, and the San Diego medical examiner and the district attorney insist that it was a suicide. And I forgot, of course, or I saved it for the pièce de résistance, the number one finding that, for me, clearly shows this was not a suicide. Rebecca Zahau had 4 separate bruises on her scalp, on the undersurface. They're called subscapular, the undersurface of the scalp. 4 separate. That required 4 separate traumatic injuries to produce those 4 subscapular hemorrhages. When you have injuries that high up, they are considered to be due to the top of the head either being struck by something or hitting against something. Here's the point I'm making, taking their scenario, that she committed suicide, that she ties herself up and she gets up on the top of the balcony and she jumps off. There is no way in which she's going to get 4 different bruises on her scalp. There's no way. And and again, I know I'm repeating myself, but I am just so puzzled from a professional, intellectual standpoint that it's a clear-cut suicide. And yet, there is nothing clear-cut about this suicide. It is perhaps the most atypical suicide that one can ever think of. And I go and get 100 forensic pathologists and ask them to come up with other kinds of suicidal scenarios. You're not going to find many that are more bizarre, more atypical, more physically absurd than this one.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
And I just want to apologize in advance for my voice. I'm going to try and let Dick do more of the talking because I've had a cold. Sound okay, Dick?
Well, you sound better than you did the other day.
Okay, good.
Maybe that's faint support, but it's improving.
Good. So by next week, I should be back up to snuff.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The support for this episode comes from the new docuseries, Wrong Man, on Starz. Imagine serving 20 years in prison, knowing you didn't do the crime. From the Emmy Award-winning filmmaker of Paradise Lost comes the new docuseries, Wrong Man. This series follows the stories of 3 inmates who claim they are innocent as they work with a team of investigative experts to reopen their cases and seek the truth. Watch Wrong Man premiering June 3rd at 9 o'clock, only on Starz. Get the Starz app and start your free trial today.
In 2011, at the Spreckels Mansion on the Southern California coast, there were 2 unexpected deaths that have since raised many doubts and endless speculation. On July 11th, 32-year-old Rebecca Zahau was at the Spreckels Beach House along with her sister when her boyfriend's 6-year-old son fell over a second-floor banister. Sadly, he would die in the hospital days later. On July 12th, the next day, understandably distraught, Rebecca picked up her boyfriend's brother, Adam Shacknai, from the airport and brought him back to the mansion. There were reports of loud music coming from the house that evening. A neighbor claimed to hear a woman screaming. The next morning, Adam called 911, stating that he found Rebecca nude, hanging from a balcony, a supposed suicide. But the scene was unusual, to say the least. Rebecca's ankles and wrists were bound with rope, she was gagged with a t-shirt, and she was completely naked. That fall, Rebecca's death was ruled a suicide, and 6-year-old Max's death was ruled an accident. Police held a press conference to announce that neither death involved foul play. But this year, Adam Shacknai was found responsible for Rebecca's death in a civil suit filed by Rebecca's family. Police have not filed any charges. Our quiet end discussion today is a mystery. What happened at the mansion back in July 2011? Are we talking about an accident and a suicide? An accident and a murder and a suicide, or 2 murders? Let's pour ourselves a brew and mull it over.
And we have a very nice beer today. This one is called Wesley from Sante Adarius Rustic Ales in Capitola, California. Now, this is a wild ale, which we've had before. These are beers that are allowed to ferment spontaneously. So you get yeast and bacteria that are just kind of floating around in the air to work their magic. And these beers tend to have a kind of a funky, tart, sour taste, not to everybody's liking. But I know you like sours and wild ales quite a bit.
I love them. They're delicious.
So Wesley is a hazy, light orange-colored beer with a small white head that quickly disappears. There's a fruit-forward aroma and some champagne, so sort of like grape. Now, it's got a tart apricot taste, white wine champagne taste, and a little bit of oak, a little bit of barrel there, too. It's a crisp, nicely carbonated beer, wonderful beer for summer, which it's finally getting to be around here. So, let's toast.
All right, let's open it up.
Okay. So we'll take these down to the quiet end, join our fans. They're all waiting for us.
Yes, 3 of them.
Yeah. Well, for us, that's a crowd, right?
It is, yes.
Well, good to see them again, though. So as mentioned in the introduction, this episode is about 2 deaths that occurred in the same home, only 2 days apart. These are the accidental death of 6-year-old boy Max Shacknai and his father's live-in girlfriend, Rebecca Zahau, in July of 2011. While police have closed investigations in these deaths, the families, several forensic experts, and many others feel that the rulings of an accident and a suicide should be re-examined. Let's start with a little background on both Rebecca and Max's father, Jonah Shacknai. Jonah owned the home, and it was his summer home. He and Rebecca lived in the house during the summer, and his 3 children from his 2 previous marriages lived with them part-time. Rebecca had been born in Burma in 1979, the second daughter in a family who worked with Christian ministries. Her family were ethnic and religious minorities, and they were persecuted for those. Her father was imprisoned by the military regime there for fighting for religious freedom in Burma. He later sought political asylum in Germany so his family would have a chance for a better future. Rebecca was very young at the time. She and her older siblings grew up in Germany, raised in a Protestant church. Most of Rebecca's immediate family migrated to America, to the St. Louis, Missouri area. And Rebecca herself moved to the United States in 2011.
Rebecca's visa was expiring in May of 2002, though, and that might explain why she rushed into marrying Neil, who was a 36-year-old nursing student in Scottsdale, Arizona. Rebecca continued her education and became a surgical assistant. Eventually, she worked for an ophthalmologist. Her relationship with Neil became strained as they were moving in different directions, and she was very focused on a career, while Neil seemed to have trouble finding his way. So after being separated off and on for a few years, they divorced in early 2011. But she began dating Jonah in 2008, while she was separated but still married to Neil. In August 2009, Rebecca was arrested for shoplifting, and she pleaded guilty to stealing $1,000 worth of jewelry from a Macy's in Phoenix, Arizona, and she was given probation. So this was a period in her life where she was going through a lot of stress and things weren't going great for her. But then things seemed to get better as she got more serious with Jonah. She was working as an ophthalmic technician from April 2008 to December 2010, and then she quit at that time so she could be home and help Jonah with his children. It's likely that Rebecca would have been pretty overwhelmed when she first saw the opulent home on Ocean Boulevard. The main house and the guest house had 27 rooms, 2 apartments, and a 6-car garage. She had a far more modest background, like most of us do.
Now, for the very wealthy, like Jonah Shacknai, the Coronado Mansion was just a summer cottage. Now, the Coronado Mansion was a little rough around the edges. Some rooms hadn't been redecorated since the 50s, but it was still quite the mansion. The guest house itself was bigger than many families' homes, and in better shape than the mansion itself. The guest house had a living room, 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, and 3 bathrooms. The history of the Spreckels estate was well known, with many stories of generation after generation of a rich, famous, and infamous family who had been written about in books, newspapers, and gossip columns. Now, with 2 deaths in 2 days in that summer of 2011, superstitious neighbors began to wonder if the place was haunted.
Right, but we don't believe in that stuff.
So Jonah Shacknai shared custody of his son Max with his second ex-wife Dina. She lived close by. Rebecca Zahau loved the little boy as if he were her own son. Now, Jonah also spent a lot of time with his 2 older children by his first wife, Kim. His daughter Cameron was 14 and his older son Josh was 11. They, too, lived most of the year in Scottsdale, Arizona. Jonah's older children were not as accepting of Rebecca as Max was. Now, this isn't surprising, especially with a teenage daughter. So Jonah had to juggle things to keep everyone happy. And it wasn't easy for Rebecca to win over the older kids.
Oh, I'm sure it wasn't. Teenage girls do not take kindly.
So Rebecca had a journal on her phone where she wrote about her difficulties in her relationship with Jonah. At times she seemed to feel like she loved Jonah more than he loved her. She also wrote about how the older children didn't like her and how it could be difficult to be a caretaker in this situation. According to Jonah's close friends, he is very happy to be living with Rebecca. They seemed to have a loving relationship after his 2 earlier volatile marriages. The most troubled one was with the second ex-wife, Dina, who was a child psychologist. On Sunday, July 10th, Rebecca's teenage sister, Zena, arrived for a 3-week visit. Zena really looked up to her 20 years older sister and was excited to fly from St. Joseph, Missouri to Southern California for the long visit. Rebecca was just as happy to see her little sister, and Jonah always welcomed her family's visits.
Well, Rebecca's background was as different from Jonah's as it could be, really. Jonah was born on the East Coast to Gideon and Selma Shacknai and raised in Suffern, New York. He and his brother Adam were from a tight-knit, really high-achieving family. Selma was an educator and a therapist during most of her adult life. Now Gideon, he came to America as a young man when he was 21, and that's when he got his citizenship. Jonah and Adam grew up in the Jewish faith. Jonah is a handsome man, dark hair, tall, pretty charismatic. He was successful as a businessman, and he became wealthy at a pretty young age in the business world. So Jonah and Rebecca had been together for a little less than 2 years when Max fell on Monday, July 11th. In the tense days while his son was fighting for his life, Rebecca did everything she could to help out and make things a little easier for Jonah. Because Jonah, he was staying at the Ronald McDonald House across from the Children's Hospital in San Diego, so that he could be close to his son, who hadn't regained consciousness since his fall. No one knew exactly how Max's accident happened because there were no witnesses, and if there were, none that came forward, but we're pretty sure there were no witnesses. He was an active little boy, and he played soccer, and he had a really good physical coordination. So why had he fallen? One theory was that he'd been going too fast on his razor scooter on the upper landing, and he hadn't been able to stop before he hit the railing and flipped over. It looked as though he might have grabbed onto the crystal chandelier in an attempt to save himself. But the light fixture, the scooter, and Max all ended up in a heap on the carpet below, just inside the front door in the vestibule area. So some thought he might have been sliding on the banister and lost his grip, or maybe he tried to hang on to the chandelier. But the scooter could have been downstairs already, but it was down there also with a soccer ball. And there were some marks on the post there that kind of gave the indication that the scooter had hit it. There was some paint from the banister on the scooter, but no one knows if this occurred at the time of the accident. It could have happened any time when he's hauling his scooter through the house. So this is one of those little razor scooters, which doesn't have a motor. It's got very small wheels, and the platform is very low to the ground. So the upstairs had some thick carpet, which would have made it pretty difficult for him to pick up much speed on that thing upstairs, though. So I just don't see how he could propel himself over the banister on that kind of a scooter in those kind of conditions. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I know how those little razor scooters are. You need a smooth surface to be able to motorize that.
To get moving, yeah.
Get it moving. I don't think he could build up enough speed on a carpet to flip himself over the banister.
I agree, but then on the other hand, I think on the carpet you might get going and then stop suddenly in a thick pile of carpet, and that could make you go over. So I think it's still a possibility.
Sure, it's possible.
Yeah.
And there are a couple other possibilities. One was that the soccer ball got caught in the chandelier, and Max tried to get it out and fell. Or even that the family dog, Ocean the Weimaraner, had tripped Max or bumped him.
That's possible. Now, one interesting thing is that the chandelier chain was found to be clean cut rather than torn apart. And I wasn't able to find out if that was done by the paramedics who lifted it off of him, or if that was something that was pre-existing, because that would be strange.
That would be.
Yeah.
But I would think if everything came crashing down together, that it was the rescuers or the paramedics.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Who cut it.
Otherwise, it would be very suspicious. But the doctors at the hospital, they were trying to save him, but they were pretty puzzled that he was so near death when his physical injuries didn't seem that bad. He had no broken bones, and he was undergoing tests to see if he might have some undetected genetic heart malfunction.
Well, what they're looking for is a syndrome called long QT syndrome. And this is a syndrome that can result in rhythm disturbances. What will happen is it's kind of like a sudden death thing in young kids and athletes and so on. So that's a possibility, although unlikely.
So what do you think killed him then?
Well, I think that he probably did grab onto the chandelier.
To catch himself?
Because otherwise, I mean, if it had been cut, it'd be on the floor already, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that is not a significant thing.
Let's eliminate that.
All right, let's just toss that aside for now.
So one thing that hadn't been mentioned that I think would be a possibility was that he was intentionally trying to swing on the chandelier, and down it came.
That'd be kind of crazy.
Well, he's a 6-year-old kid.
Yeah, that's true.
And he's athletic.
Yeah, but they said he wasn't really a daredevil.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, that would be a daredevil thing to do.
Yeah. But I think it's apparent that he did grab onto the chandelier and everything went crashing to the floor.
Seemed like it, yeah. So it seemed like he had probably a cervical spine injury.
Well, they found that later on autopsy, that basically the spinal cord came detached from the base of the brain.
Ooh.
So this poor kid wasn't going to wake up anyway.
No, so he had no chance.
He had zero chance.
Well, that brings me also to, it seems like the parents were kind of told that there was a chance when the doctors probably knew there wasn't. Did they ever do that to let people down gradually? Because that doesn't seem ethical.
Well, I would think that they knew what was going on because they must have done imaging studies.
Yes.
So CT scan, MRI, something. So I think they would have known what had happened, unless it did go unrecognized until death. I mean, that'd be the other thing. But
I would find that strange.
I do too. I think they would have known it. And no, the answer to the other part of your question was that you're not going to try to give false hope to parents by saying, well, we hope he'll recover. We think he will. He's doing okay, or whatever was said. He was not going to recover.
Okay, well, it did kind of seem like they misled them, though.
Possibly. So Max may have fallen over the second-story railing because he was chasing a soccer ball, or going too fast on his scooter, or maybe he fell after suffering a fatal arrhythmia. Although I'm still going to not buy that, because if he had that, he wouldn't be trying to grab the chandelier.
That's true. Good point.
Now, early in the investigation, there is even the possibility that someone had pushed him over the railing, either deliberately or accidentally. So that's where the Weimaraner comes in, I guess. So as far as anyone knew, Rebecca and Zina had been the only people in the mansion with Max. His father, Jonah, was working out at a private gym in the Hotel del Coronado, which is only a few blocks away from the mansion. Rebecca and her little sister had apparently been in separate bathrooms, bathing and washing their hair when it happened.
Yeah, but this place was so large that it was possible that someone else could have been in there without either Rebecca or Zina knowing about it.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, unlikely, but possible. Rebecca made a really panicked call to Jonah's cell phone right after she found Max injured, but she was nearly unintelligible. But Jonah didn't even try and figure out what she was saying. He just rushed home. So he arrived a few minutes later and found paramedics working on his unconscious son, and they were loading him into the ambulance. Jonah's younger brother Adam didn't live in Coronado. He lived in Memphis, Tennessee, and he worked as a tugboat captain.
Quite a difference in lifestyles between the two.
Yes, yep.
So the two brothers were close in age, but as we said, lived very different lifestyles. They didn't see each other very often, but Adam was almost always invited to any events going on in the family. When their father Gideon called Adam to tell his son about Max's accident, Adam dropped everything and flew to San Diego and arrived on Tuesday evening, July 12th. He had apparently come to offer what comfort he could to Jonah. That's what family does. That's what brothers do, right? So that Jonah could be at Max's bedside, Rebecca took care of transporting people and doing the things that needed to be done. So the dog, Ocean, was in the kennel. The receptionist at the kennel would tell police that Rebecca seemed very upset about Max's accident, but was behaving appropriately, at least according to the receptionist. And shortly after she put her sister Zina on a plane for Missouri, she picked up Adam at the airport. So Zina had stayed only a day or so of her 3-week visit. When trying to clean up the mess of glass from the broken chandelier, Zina had cut her hand badly enough that she had needed stitches. Now, with everything going on, and everyone so worried about Max, it seemed wiser to Rebecca to postpone Zina's visit to another time. So off she goes. That's a reasonable thing to do. I mean, this is a young teen, right?
Yeah, I think she was 14 or 15.
Yeah.
So on the morning of Wednesday, July 13th, Adam called 911. He really frustrated and worried the dispatcher, saying, "First, I've got a woman who hung herself. I cut her down." But Adam either could not or would not give the address where the dead woman was. So it took 3 calls for the emergency operator to get the information that this death had happened at 1043 Ocean Boulevard. Then she immediately sent EMTs and police officers. Now it's a real mystery how these 2 sudden deaths happen in 2 days.
Just 2 days apart. You got to wonder if there's some connection between the two, right?
There has to be something. It's just strange.
It sure is. So the first police officers to arrive at the scene were led to the rear courtyard, where they found the body of Rebecca lying on the damp grass just below one of the balconies in the main house. Rebecca was naked except for a blue shirt that was wound several times around her neck. Red nautical rope was cinched around her neck. Her wrists were bound behind her back with the same rope, and another length of rope secured her ankles. Now, it looked like it was a tow rope for water skiing. In fact, the handle was still caught up in it. Adam told the Coronado police that he had wakened early and was on his way to the main part of the mansion to get a cup of coffee from the kitchen when he saw his brother's girlfriend suspended from the balcony with a rope around her neck. Adam said he raced into the kitchen to find a knife so he could cut her down. She had that cloth wedged in her throat, Adam said. I took it out. The rope around Rebecca's neck had been cut, and the investigators saw that the other end of the rope dangled from the balcony above her. There was a round patio table. It's wood-weathered.
Well, yeah, it was like this. It looked pretty old, right? It was kind of that gray color.
Yeah. Been out in the elements too long.
Right.
Oh, and you had mentioned, or we had mentioned, that a lot of the rooms were in somewhat shabby shape.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
A lot of upkeep that hadn't been taken care of.
Sure.
The patio table appeared to have been placed under the balcony rope. One leg of the table was broken. So Adam said he moved that table over so he could reach her to cut her down. Now, was the table leg broken off before he mounted it? Or did his weight break the table leg?
Well, it's weird, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, if it's broken or it broke shortly after he stood on it, how's he going to maintain enough balance on a three-legged table?
Well, yeah, because it's going to take a minute to saw through that rope.
Right.
With a knife. I mean, that's that rope that you use in the water. It's got like metal fibers in it. It's like fiberglass.
It's not easy to saw through it, right?
No. So that's one very suspicious thing, I thought. That was one of the more suspicious things about it.
EMTs tried to find a pulse, but there was none. Paramedic John Feliciano quickly checked the woman and shook his head. She's cold to the touch. Rigor mortis is already beginning in her jaw, he said. So for rigor to be noticeable, Rebecca would have to have died hours before.
Right, yeah. Now at 8 o'clock, the chief, Scanlon, entered the Coronado Mobile Command vehicle that was parked in front of the house to speak with Adam. And at first, Adam seemed to like he didn't hear what they were asking him. Then he blurted out of nowhere, "This is fucking crazy. I don't think my bedside manner is that bad." So they kind of thought that was an inappropriate, weird thing to say.
Boy, I guess.
But, you know, he could have been in shock, and he was kind of weird anyway, so I don't know if you can make much out of that.
Yeah, I suppose not. Although, when you look back at things using the retrospectoscope,
yeah,
it's a strange statement and possibly incriminating.
Well, I just find it a little flippant. Somebody's died. I think he's making kind of a joke there. I don't like it for that reason.
I was looking at it that he was trying to make a move on Rebecca.
Really? That didn't even occur to me.
That's why he says, I don't think my bedside manner is that bad.
Well, that's really weird. I didn't take it that way at all.
Well, see, it's my scatological mind working.
Well, I mean, maybe that's one way to look at it. I didn't think of that. That's interesting.
So just after 8 o'clock, the Coronado Police Department asked San Diego County Sheriff's detectives and criminalists from the crime lab to respond to the mansion. No one in the Sheriff's Department knew exactly what had happened, only that a woman's body had been discovered less than 2 hours earlier.
So Jonah's at his son's bedside with Dina, his mother, the little boy's mother, when he received a text from Adam telling him that Rebecca had killed herself. So according to Dina, Jonah told her that Rebecca had killed herself and pantomimed stabbing himself in the stomach. And when Dina asked why, he said, Asian honor. So that was kind of a strange thing.
It sure is.
That's another flippant thing, so maybe that's just the way that family talked.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't any mention of stabbing.
No, but I don't think that's the point. I think the point is he's saying she killed herself because it's an Asian thing that she couldn't live with the fact that the boy got hurt under her care. But to pantomime Harry Carey like that is very flippant and disrespectful in that situation.
And racist.
Yes, right. And this is supposed to be somebody that he loved, so yeah. I find that odd.
Well, this is according to Dna.
Yeah, that's true too.
He might not have ever said anything like that, because we know that he and Dna had a rather contentious marriage.
Right, and in the beginning, Dna kind of blamed Rebecca for a while, so she might have had a bad attitude about Rebecca in the beginning, which I can kind of understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this was already shaping up to be a high-profile case, and the sheriff's office quickly agreed to assist the much smaller Coronado Police Department. The investigation into Rebecca's death would be handled by the San Diego Sheriff's Homicide Team. Each two-detective team would have a specific assignment. Some would interview possible suspects and witnesses, some would gather physical evidence, and fingerprint experts would lift what prints they could.
Yeah, there'd be like hundreds of photographs taken, right? Both on the scene, and then they even had helicopters circling around taking photos of the neighborhood. So there's a lot of exposure here.
Sure was.
Yeah, the pilots on the helicopters could actually see nearby residents sitting on their roofs and high balconies, trying to see what was going on in the courtyard there. And it was really sad that Rebecca had no protection from the public eye. Some people were even using binoculars to look at her. She was just laying there exposed and nude. So I don't know why this occurred. I feel like this was inappropriate and disrespectful as well, that they didn't erect a temporary tent over her body to give her any privacy from onlookers.
Right, it seems that could have been done, right?
It's often done, yes. It really upset her family to hear that she was out there all day, exposed to the world. So that morning, Dna and Jonah felt like it was kind of touch and go whether Max would live. Jonah was devastated. It had taken him a really long time to find Dna when he wanted to let her know what was going on with Max. She'd been home, but I guess she was sick, and people were trying to reach her. Although Jonah and Dna had gone through a really contentious divorce, they did seem to agree, on the care of their child pretty well. They loved him, and they thought that he was really like the one good thing that came out of their marriage. So they were sitting beside his bed, watching him, praying and hoping that he's going to open his eyes and be his normal self again, which again brings me back to, what are the doctors telling them? Really confusing to me.
It certainly is. So detectives were going over the grounds of the mansion, looking for anything that could be of evidentiary value. And Adam Shacknai was interviewed at the Coronado Police Department headquarters. With Adam's permission, the conversation was taped. It was a brief interview lasting less than an hour. Adam repeated what he remembered of the prior evening and did add a little bit of detail. After having a quick dinner with his brother, Jonah, and Rebecca, who had picked him up at the airport, Rebecca and Adam had dropped Jonah off at the Ronald McDonald House and then returned to the Spreckels Mansion. Adam said he slept in the guest house, and as far as he knew, Rebecca had gone to her room in the main house. He believed that they were the only two people present at the estate during the night.
Adam said he was crossing the square of grass below the balcony of Rebecca's bedroom when he saw her hanging there. He had been able to find the right drawer in the kitchen where the knives were kept, and he grabbed one and raced back to cut her down. When he hadn't been able to revive her, he said, that's when he called 911. And then he did agree to be processed for evidence, like fingerprints and DNA, stuff like that. He also gave them his shoes and had photos taken of himself with his shirt off and all that.
Yeah. And they got DNA samples from his mouth, and they got hair samples from his head and fingernail scrapings. The interview on tape lasted about 6 minutes. And then he was asked if he would be willing to take a polygraph test regarding the statement he had given them, and Adam said he had no problem doing that. The detectives set up a lie detector test. So they first dropped Adam Shacknai off at a car rental place at Lindbergh Field at Adam's request. So he needed a vehicle to get around in.
Sure.
Shortly before 5 p.m., detectives called Adam and asked if he was still willing to take the test. And Adam said he wanted to speak to his brother Jonah about it and would call them back in a few minutes. And when he did call back, he said, I have nothing to hide. I'm willing to take the test.
So that sounds all like it's in his favor.
He's willing to do it.
It was about 5:30 when Adam arrived at the San Diego homicide offices to meet with the polygrapher.
Yeah, 4 times the detective explained to Adam that he was in the sheriff's office voluntarily and he did not have to take the lie detector test. And 4 times Adam said he had nothing to hide. He grew nervous only when the polygrapher began to hook him up to the leads for the polygraph: blood pressure, breathing patterns, galvanic skin response, and heart rate. He asked about what the lie detector test could say, even when the leads were attached to an innocent person.
Okay, yeah. I guess that's pretty normal to get nervous when you're hooked up to a lie detector.
Well, I certainly would be.
Sure, especially when someone's dead.
I'd be nervous even if I hadn't done it.
Yeah, so there were 3 of these really relevant questions. Could you just tell us what those were? I'm trying to save my voice.
Okay. So the first question was regarding the death of Rebecca. Do you know for sure if anyone did anything to her that resulted in her death? Adam answered no. Second question was regarding the death of Rebecca. Did you yourself do anything to her that resulted in her death? Adam again answered no. And the third question was regarding the death of Rebecca. Were you in the guest room that she was found hanging from at any time during the night? Again, the answer was no. Now, the results at the conclusion of the polygraph examination, careful evaluation of the polygraph charts revealed insufficient physiologic responses necessary to make a determination.
So that's what that guy said. But then we saw the show about this on Marcia Clark, where another expert said that when he looked at the findings, he thought that he had actually failed the test.
Right. The expert on Marcia Clark's show didn't think that the questions were asked appropriately, didn't think that the equipment was used appropriately in terms of the bulky sweatshirt that he had on.
Mm-hmm.
And that when he reviewed the polygraph charts, his opinion was totally different from the examiner's opinion. And the expert's opinion was that this is clearly lies.
Deceptive.
Deceptions, okay.
Sure.
Just an interesting point.
And, everybody knows these aren't admissible in court anyway. But when someone fails, it usually makes the police look at them a lot harder, I believe.
Well, of course. So they, like you said, they might be inadmissible in a court of law, but police like them.
Right, exactly.
So Adam said he'd received a phone call from his father, Gideon, on Tuesday, telling him that his nephew Max had fallen and hit his head. His father said Max was in a coma in very serious condition. Adam said, I called Rebecca, who is my brother's girlfriend. I told her I would fly out from Memphis to give whatever help and support I could. I told her I'd rent a car at the airport, but she said she would pick me up since she was dropping her sister off at the airport anyway. So Rebecca picked him up, and they drove to the children's hospital where they picked up Jonah and Jonah's best friend, Dr. Howard Luber. Then they drove back to the airport, Adam recalled. Adam said he believed that Dr. Luber was in San Diego to support Jonah after his son's accident. Jonah, Rebecca, and Adam had dinner together at a local restaurant. And there's another story that Dr. Luber was also at that dinner before the airport. Probably not a serious inconsistency.
No.
So after they ate, Rebecca drove back once again to the hospital, where Jonah showed them his room at the Ronald McDonald House. Then Adam and Rebecca drove to Jonah's mansion on Ocean Boulevard, and Adam estimated they arrived there between 7:30 and 8 o'clock in the evening. Rebecca told Adam he could stay in the guest house, and Adam said he didn't see Rebecca for the rest of the night. He went to the guest house, drank a Diet 7-Up, called his girlfriend. He also said he'd taken an Ambien sleeping pill and gone to bed. He did recall getting up during the night to go to the bathroom, and then fell back asleep until 6:15 in the morning.
So here's an interesting thing. He said he began his day the next morning by pulling up a porn site on his iPhone, and after watching porn, he said he headed over to the main house to invite Rebecca to go to breakfast with him. But he'd opened his door, and that's when he saw the red rope hanging off the balcony of the house, with the body hanging from it. And at first he thought it was some kind of prank, some kids messing around, but then he recognized that it was Rebecca. So he'd run inside the main house, grabbed the knife, and came out to get her down. But this whole idea of the porn is interesting.
Isn't it?
It really is.
I mean, he's there to support his brother.
There's a family tragedy occurring.
Yeah. So, the first thing even before this is, why wasn't he at the hospital with him?
Right.
If he's so supportive.
Exactly.
That he was at his house. And then the second one is, you wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is access a porn site. So Adam said I had to pull the patio table over to her body so I could reach her. I stood on the table, cut the rope, and put her on the ground. No mention of the broken leg. So.
No, and I don't know if the broken leg was there. Couldn't find out about that, but I just know when the table was moved later, it only had 3 legs.
Adam said I called 911 and then immediately started CPR on Rebecca after I pulled the blue scarf out of her mouth.
Yeah, but he never mentioned on the 911 call that she had this blue scarf stuffed into her mouth.
Nor did he mention that she was tied and nude.
No, so that's pretty weird too.
Yep. So the dispatcher asked me for the address, and I ran around to the front of the house so I could tell the location.
So this might explain why he didn't give the address right away, which is understandable that he might not know it.
I can see that.
Okay, me too.
Then I went back to Rebecca, and the police were there within a couple minutes. Adam said he hadn't heard anything at all during the night. In fact, he noted how quiet it was. So then the detective started asking more probing questions, but Adam denied any knowledge or involvement in Rebecca's hanging, and he said he had never been in the room next to the balcony where Rebecca had hung herself.
And this is important.
It is.
Yeah.
According to the police, Adam neither passed nor failed on the lie detector charts. Adam's admission about his early morning porn watching was probably a bit unusual.
I'd say so.
But certainly not an admission of anything, right?
Well, no, it's certainly not a crime. It's just a little strange.
And he had taken Ambien the night before. Now, you and I know how weird you can get with Ambien.
Yes.
And recent studies have shown that many people have proven to react strangely to this sleeping pill.
Scary, yes. I can't take it.
So without even being aware of it, people can walk or drive in their sleep. They could eat, drink, swim, make phone calls, do all manner of activities where they're actually sound asleep and have no memory at all of any of this stuff. And we even have a case of one guy who used the Ambien defense as his explanation for the drowning murder of his wife. He insisted he had no memory at all of attacking her in the middle of the night.
Yeah, but I don't think that went over very well.
Didn't work.
No.
But Adam wasn't claiming he had had an Ambien-prompted activity during the previous night, because he was sure he had gotten out of bed only once, and that was just to use the bathroom.
So now Jonah Shacknai, he had lost his girlfriend, and he's losing his son, and he went to talk to the detectives. They wanted to speak to him. Now he told them that his brother Adam had called him at 6:58 that Wednesday morning and told him that Rebecca had taken her life. Not even 48 hours had passed since his son had fallen. Jonah said he'd hoped to stay at the Ronald McDonald House across the street from the hospital, but there were no vacancies that first night, so he'd checked into a nearby hotel. He didn't want to be more than a few minutes away from Max's hospital room. He got a few hours sleep, but spent most of his time beside his son's bed. Jonah said he'd attempted to locate his ex-wife Dna, but he'd gotten no answers when he called her phones, and he was able to reach her twin sister, Nina.
Dina and Nina.
Tina and Nina. Nina Romano.
Why do people do that to their twins?
I don't know. It's kind of silly. But Nina, anyway, was in San Francisco. Dina had finally responded to the police knocking on her door early Tuesday. So Jonah verified that Rebecca had put Zena on the plane to return to Missouri, and not long after she picked up Adam on his flight from Memphis. And he really appreciated all that she was doing to help him out with his family and everything that was going on, taking care of all the details that he was too distraught to take care of. He knew that she wanted to talk with him and to be updated about how Max was doing, but she was trying not to bother him and let him deal with everything in the family. And she was just taking care of the legwork.
Yeah, Jonah said, I called her whenever I could. Now, his memory of late Tuesday evening differed a little bit from Adam's. Jonah said that he, Adam, Dr. Luber, and Rebecca ate a quick dinner together. And then Rebecca drove Luber to the airport in time for his flight before she and Adam headed for the mansion. Jonah said he had called Rebecca at midnight, but she didn't answer the phone. Jonah left a message saying that things were looking worse for Max's outcome. So the message had been listened to and deleted, which would support the suicide theory. If she thought the child was going to die, then maybe Rebecca felt she was responsible for it and became suicidal.
I suppose. That's kind of a big step, and wouldn't you think that
it's a jump, I think.
I think so.
And from what we know, and we'll talk more about this later, her family members vehemently denied that she would ever be suicidal.
Well, that happens a lot, though. I don't know if that means a lot.
Well, I think so.
You do?
Yeah. And she hadn't shown any indication.
No, she hadn't.
I guess the implication is, well, once she found out that Max was probably going to die, and she felt responsible for not watching him better, although that's a stretch, she became suicidal.
Well, I guess I could believe all that, but then when you get to the tying the hands and legs, and there's so many things which we'll go over.
We'll have some things to say about that.
Absolutely.
Now, Jonah said he hadn't been worried when Rebecca didn't answer. He just assumed she was asleep.
Well, yeah, it was about midnight.
Yeah, somewhere around there. And she had planned to stay alone in the big house, and Adam had a room in the guest house. And as far as Jonah knew, there was no one else on the estate on Tuesday night.
Yeah, but Rebecca might have already been dead at midnight.
Well, she could have. I mean, if at 6 a.m. or whenever Adam found her and cut her down, rigor had already set in. That's 4 to 6 hours after death anyway.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So she could have been dead. But that would open up the question, if she was dead, who deleted the message?
Exactly. And who else was in that room?
Right.
And I think that's a big part of the whole situation.
Yeah, now Jonah told the investigators that he was trying to piece together what could have happened, both with his little boy's devastating fall and his girlfriend's shocking death. One thing he was adamant about was that Rebecca would not have chosen suicide. She wasn't on any medication. She's a very health-conscious person, being careful to eat healthy foods and to exercise regularly. She wasn't unhappy. Now, she did feel terrible about his son's fall, but he didn't think it was to the point of killing herself.
So this directly contradicts what Dna said he said in the hospital room.
Right.
So would you discount what Dna said?
I would, just because they didn't like each other.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far.
I would.
Okay. Well, you might be right.
So she certainly felt terrible about Max's fall, but Jonah didn't think it was to the point of Rebecca killing herself. And he was positive that Rebecca hadn't been depressed or shown any suicidal thoughts. Naturally, she was sad and worried, but she was not a moody or unstable woman.
So Jonah was never a suspect?
No, he wasn't. The Ronald McDonald House had security cameras all over. Investigators were able to obtain images of Jonah at the entrance doors to the McDonald House and in the corridors, arriving and leaving his room. So they could place the times Jonah had gone to his room and then left to sit with Max, and has returned to the McDonald House to catch a few hours' sleep. So they had a videotape, basically, of where he was the entire night. So it wasn't him. Jonah told detectives that Rebecca's relatives were on their way from Missouri and wanted to stay at his estate. But it was a crime scene, so investigators said that he couldn't stay there. They asked for his permission to search the house. Jonah said he had no objections to that. At this point, he still had very little information about how and where Rebecca had died.
So the San Diego detectives learned about Rebecca arranging for the dog to be at the kennel for a few days after Max's fall, because she thought that was better with the people coming and going. And Jonah really spoke lovingly about her. He said that he was really anxious that there might be someone out there who did this to her who could be hazardous to him or his other children. Maybe somebody was after him. He was kind of a prominent person.
Now, information extracted from Rebecca's cell phone showed that Jonah's call had come in at 11:48 p.m., right when he said, around midnight.
Right, yep.
On July 13th, police examined a laptop whose only active user account was Rebecca, and an iMac whose single user account was Jonah. Both these computers were from the guest room or computer room with the balcony where Rebecca had allegedly hung herself. So investigators reached the conclusion that no searches were conducted for the terms suicide, rope, knots, or hanging on either computer. A review of the internet history from Rebecca's computer showed during the past 24 hours identified numerous searches and viewing of pornography, including lesbian and anime pornography. Anime porn is a Japanese style of animated cartoon.
And that can be kind of violent. I mean, of course it's sexually explicit, it's porn, but it can also have that violent aspect.
Yeah. So was Rebecca doing that? Do we know?
We don't know, of course.
We don't know.
But it makes me think that Adam did that. I mean, it's a little funny to me that anime is Asian people, Japanese people, and Rebecca's Asian.
Right.
And he's looking at pornography of Asian women. That's a little bit disconcerting.
He's looking at porn on his iPhone.
Yes, well, he admitted to the iPhone. But I'm wondering if that was him. I find it hard to believe it would have been her, especially if she was going to kill herself. That would be very unusual.
It would be.
So that makes me very suspicious of him.
Just another thing against Adam.
Yeah, I think so.
So the investigators were very curious about the internet links that someone had connected to in the hours during which Rebecca died. Would she have searched for pornography?
I don't think so.
Well,
I mean, no. That's very unusual. That she would be looking at lesbian and Japanese anime pornography? Not very likely. Especially
I wouldn't think. I mean,
if she's suicidal, and then if she's not suicidal, she's grieving over this child's accident. I just can't see her doing that.
It just doesn't sound like something.
No.
So, and as far as we know, the only other person on the estate that night was Adam.
And he's already admitted to looking up porn.
Well, on his cell phone.
Well, sure. But what's the difference? If he's looking up porn, why wouldn't he have done it in there on the computer?
Well, he might have.
He might have, right.
Adam said he'd never been in the mansion itself the night before.
Right, but it doesn't mean he wasn't.
Right. He went directly to the guest house where his room was, and the computers were in the main house. Now, he says he never was in the room next door to where Rebecca hung herself, and I'm assuming that they asked him if he viewed porn on her computer, and he said no.
Well, sure, because he couldn't have done it if he wasn't in there.
Right. That's true. So investigators asked Dr. Luber, who was probably one of Jonah's best friends. They asked him about Jonah's relationship with Rebecca, and Luber said they had been together for just about 2 years. He said they had a special relationship. Jonah found a great deal of happiness with Rebecca, much more than he did in either of his marriages. They were very compatible. She brought tranquility into his life. So Jonah was a Ph.D., and Luber was an M.D., and they had both lived in New York when they first became friends. Eventually, they and their wives moved to the Phoenix, Scottsdale area, and they often double-dated. At that time, Jonah was married to his first wife, Kim, and Luber's wife and Kim were good friends. Now, Jonah had started his business in 1988, and he was extremely successful in the pharmaceutical and beauty products field. Eventually, his corporation, Medicis, was responsible for putting Restylane on the market. Very lucrative.
Yeah, so he's very rich.
The two deaths were being investigated by overlapping teams of detectives. Max's tragic fall and Rebecca's death were somehow connected, even if only by the timing.
Yeah, I mean, we'll go over the possibilities.
Now, as far as anyone knew for sure, there were only 3 people in the mansion when Max went over the second-story railing. Max, Rebecca, and Rebecca's sister Zena.
So I would imagine it wasn't unusual for a 6-year-old to be out of sight for 15 or 20 minutes or whatever. And there would be areas in that mansion where they couldn't hear him. But that accident was loud, so they heard a crash and they were horrified.
Well, yeah, they certainly would hear the chandelier crashing to the floor.
Yes, it was very loud. So Rebecca rushed over and knelt beside the little boy, and she shouted to Zena to call 911. So Zena was so upset that the operator couldn't understand her. And a tape of the call shows that the 911 dispatcher thought Zena was calling about her mother, who'd fallen down. So Zena finally gave up trying to explain it, but all that mattered is that the paramedics were on their way, I guess. So little confusion there, but they were called promptly. But nobody could figure out why he went over the rail. We went over that.
We did.
Yeah. So Monday had been a blur for all of them, with Jonah at the hospital with Max and Rebecca staying home and taking care of whatever needed to be done there. And she felt that Max's birth mother, Dna, should be with Jonah watching over their son. So, as much as she would like to be at the hospital and know what's going on, she stayed away. And I think that was appropriate. That was the right thing to do. So she knew that Zena was really traumatized and disappointed by the whole thing, but it was very reasonable that she sent her home. So I think she was doing everything right.
Well, I do, yeah.
Yeah, so this marriage between Jonah and Dna, that ended back in 2008 when they were living in Arizona. And there were some records of arguments.
There were. Now, they were living in Paradise Valley, Arizona, when Jonah went to the local police station one day to report that Dna and he had had an argument. He said that she had become very angry and abusive with him. Now, Jonah had an attack-trained German Shepherd at the time, and the dog became agitated to see him threatened. Now, Jonah said he quickly got between his dog and Dna, and that had given Jonah a chance to leave before the situation had gotten worse. Now, he didn't want to make a formal complaint, but he did want to have the incident on record. Now, the very next day, Dna went into the police department, bringing with her a computer disk with 16 photographs of bruises on her body that she said had been caused by the dog. Now, she didn't say that Jonah had ordered the dog to attack her, but she said Jonah was in no hurry to call the dog off.
So things weren't very good at that marriage.
They weren't.
No. So they divorced shortly after that, and they had shared custody of Max. But there was no indication or witnesses that said that Jonah and Rebecca were violent or had domestic violence in the house.
Right. And then we also have a report from the San Diego Tribune that Jonah and Dna had been involved in 2 other domestic incidents. So reports from the Paradise Valley Police Department showed that in 2008, Jonah accused Dna of trying to choke him. And in 2009, she claimed that Jonah elbowed her and cursed her as she was trying to leave the house.
So to me, it just doesn't seem like a serious domestic violence type situation. And I would never talk down anything like that, but it just sounds like they were kind of going back and forth.
Yeah, I'll buy that.
Seems that way anyway, from what we know.
Yes.
So police had to canvass the area after Rebecca's death to see if anyone had heard anything. And one woman said she was watching TV at 11:30 when she heard a woman screaming. She said it came from the direction of Jonah's house. She heard a scream and then another scream and then help, help. She turned her TV down so she could hear, but the cries subsided then and they stopped. She said she couldn't decide what to do, to wake up her husband or call the police. So in the end, she hadn't told anyone about the screams. Not her husband, not the police, nobody. Another neighbor, a man who was vacationing in Coronado with his family, contacted the San Diego County detective saying he might have information that would help. This caused some confusion.
Well, I'm confused.
Yeah.
Now, the guy said that he and his family had been riding bicycles from a grocery store back to their vacation home. And it was around 10 o'clock at night on July 12th. His kids had spotted a possum waddling beside the road, and they stopped to watch it. And he happened to stop his bike right in front of the Spreckels Mansion while he waited for them to catch up with him. He glanced up at the residence and noticed some movement at the front door. Well, he could see that it was a woman, and he watched her. She checked the door but didn't go in. She was nervously turning around and walking back and forth, kind of like she's just trying to decide what to do. Then she came down from the porch, walked back and forth some more, hesitated, started pacing again. And finally she walked along some grass that had joined the driveway and disappeared. The guy told detectives he thought she was behaving kind of oddly, but at that point his kids and wife had caught up with him, and off they went. Although his wife had seen the indecisive woman walking toward the back of the Shacknai estate, and then into the shadows. They both wondered about her, but they rode on home, getting back at around 11:25. The man insisted that the woman he saw was Dna, Max's mother, but he must have been mistaken, because we've got plenty of witnesses who placed Dna in the hospital at Max's bedside. He was shown photos of Rebecca. He said that the woman pacing around the entrance to the mansion looked nothing at all like Rebecca.
Right. Could have very well been Nina, the sister, who looked a little bit like Dna.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
She's in San Francisco.
Well, she'd gone and picked her up at that point, so it could have been.
Could have been, but it wasn't Rebecca. The other thing is, it's late at night. How good an identification are you going to make?
I know.
In darkness.
Not very good. So what do you make of the fact that Rebecca was nude?
Well, you heard that in the introduction. I mean, the people that study suicides, this is a pretty rare occurrence. Or,
pretty much unheard of.
Unheard of occurrence. If you're getting ready to kill yourself, you're generally not going to take all your clothes off prior to killing yourself.
Yes. And what about the tow rope that had been used to bind her hands and her ankles?
Well, there was this thick reddish-orange tow rope. Her hands were bound behind her back and her ankles were tied together. So there were several loops, 5 loops around her right wrist and 6 around her left.
So I guess it's not totally unheard of for people to tie their wrists together before they hang themselves.
I can see that if you're thinking you're going to kill yourself and you don't want to have second thoughts.
Yeah, and you don't want to be grabbing at it. Sure, I could see that, but the legs make no sense.
Why the ankles?
Yeah, why would you do that? That makes no sense to me. And then also there was some tape residue on her legs, like maybe she tried to use tape first before using the rope, but there was no tape found in the room. Very suspicious.
Strange. The medical examiner also noted dabs of black paint, both on the loops of rope around her left wrist, some dabs on her breasts. He also found that Rebecca's right hand could be slipped out of the binding with mild pressure, and when they took up slack on the right, her left hand could easily be removed. And her ankles were bound the same way as her wrists were.
Mm-hmm.
Now, besides the fact that it's unlikely, if you're suicidal, that you're going to tie your wrists and ankles together, how then do you get to the balcony, over the railing of the balcony, and go over?
It would be tough, right?
She's bound up. She'd have to kind of hop over.
Oh, yeah, just kind of bend and go head first, but it would be hard.
It would be.
So her neck wasn't broken, but there was hemorrhaging. And where was the hemorrhaging?
Well, it's in the big neck muscles, the sternocleidomastoid and what are called strap muscles.
So the big triangular...
Shoulder. neck and shoulder.
Okay.
So the pathologist felt that these hemorrhages had occurred when she dropped the 9 feet 2 inches from the balcony. There were a lot of petechiae, which again are these little pinpoint hemorrhages, in her eyes, face, and mouth, and coarser petechiae above the furrow left by the rope in her neck. These occur during strangulation, whether by human hands, by ligature, by garrote, or by hanging. And then her hyoid bone, which is a bone in the neck, was fractured, something that happens often when a victim is manually strangled. And as you heard from the expert, people that are hanging themselves, when they go over and the rope tightens, it's right under the jawline. So it'd be tough to break a hyoid bone by hanging because that's lower.
Okay, so that doesn't match up.
Right. And then another detail that most women would notice, or probably would notice, but men wouldn't.
Well, women with longer hair.
And the detail is that Rebecca's long hair was beneath the rope around her neck. So you know how women who have long hair, they always lift up their hair off their neck when they put on coats or other things that might bind it in, right?
I would think that would just be a habit, yeah.
So the idea is that if Rebecca had intended to hang herself, the logical thing is that she would lift her hair free of the rope. And if nothing else, to get a good tight fit around her neck.
Yeah, so that seems minor, but it is an odd thing. It really is.
Yeah. So when the medical examiner had first examined her body around 7:30 the night before, he found rigor mortis was marked in her upper and lower extremities and in her neck and jaw. By then she had been lying on the grass all day and into the evening. And here's another thing. The purplish lividity pattern in her body was along her back and the back of her legs, and it was fixed. Now, if she had been hanging for hours during the night before, being discovered, then gravity would have made the lividity down lower in her feet and lower legs.
So lividity, you can explain that just a little bit?
Well, it's pooling of blood. So once the heart's not beating anymore and blood flow stops, blood's going to pool. So if you're lying on your back, you're going to have black and blue marks on your back. If you're standing up, it's going to be in your feet and lower legs. If you're lying prone, face down, it's going to be in your chest and face.
So that to me seems like kind of obvious evidence there that she was not hanging.
For that long a time, right?
Well, or maybe not at all.
Right.
I mean, some people who feel like Adam killed her feel
That's
like
true.
that was all just made to look like she was hanging.
Yeah. That I think of it that way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Then we have the tow rope. Now it's 7/16 of an inch thick, so the manner in which the rope was knotted and tied was extremely complicated. It had to have been done by someone who was both familiar with such knots and accomplished with them,
Someone who knew how to do that.
which Adam, as a tugboat captain, would certainly know.
Now, some people have said that Rebecca had helped with the boat a little bit, tying the boat to the dock and things. But to me, that doesn't mean that she would know how to do these knots. I mean, I know at least on the Marcia Clark special, the knot expert, nautical knot expert, is that what his title was?
A nautical knot.
Yeah. Said that these were quite complicated.
It would be a rather difficult knot to tie, particularly with your hands behind your back.
Well, when they did that reenactment, they tried to show how she could get it all set up in the front and then put it on her hands in the back. But still, I think that would be very difficult. But then one thing that makes me think maybe it wasn't Adam is there was no rape. There was no sexual assault. No signs of that.
Not that they could find, right?
No. She did have some scratches, right, on her forehead and her head. She had some hemorrhages beneath her scalp.
Yeah, these hemorrhages are called subgallio hemorrhages. They occur where blood's trapped between the bony part of the skull and the scalp. So you see it a lot, fairly often in newborns after tough delivery. But it can also be caused by blows to the head in adults, blows that are forcible enough to cause bleeding but not enough to fracture the skull. So you could maybe easily attribute some of the scratches on her body to bramble bushes beneath the balcony where she'd allegedly have been hanging. But most of the scratches, cuts, punctures, and bruises were on her back, extending from her neck to the middle of her buttocks. On the back of Rebecca's right hand, she had 4 red scratches, and there was a deeper abrasion between her third and fourth fingers, and her feet were caked with mud.
So this all seems really strange to me.
Yeah, so
Doesn't make any sense.
it doesn't sound like the scratches are necessarily results of the bramble bushes, not if they're on her neck and upper back.
No, not at all.
So doctors wrote a report about what was found on the second floor of the main house. Rebecca's room was at the east end of the second level of the residence. There was a white and green towel in the hallway just outside that bedroom, along with drops of what looked like dried blood. It also could have been black paint.
Well, and there were some spots of blood, but Rebecca was having her period at this time, so a lot of that was menstrual blood.
Okay.
So what about the message, the so-called suicide note? It's kind of a crude-looking message. I don't know that that would be a suicide note that most women would write.
It was painted on a wall, and it said, "She saved him, can you save her?" Now, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah, that was strange, right?
Yeah, because the meaning behind these 7 words has eluded most everyone who's ever heard about them.
Well, it's in the third person,
Right.
for one thing.
A lot of opinions on who she was, who him and her were.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if we really even need to go into it, but I just really don't think that's something that she would write. But then I also think if someone was setting it up to look like a suicide, why would they write that in the
Right.
third person?
I know.
So it's very strange. So just inside Rebecca's room, they found 2 paintbrushes, and one had the black paint on it. There were also 2 knives, one with a 4.5-inch blade and the other with an 8-inch blade. There was a white plastic bag, and closer to the bed was the tube of black paint.
And then farther inside the room, there is a brass and white metal full-size bed, a desk, a chair, bedside tables with matching lamps, some shelving, and a bookcase.
And the only thing that really looked disturbed besides the bed was that the chair was tipped over.
Now, there are a couple computers there, and the desk chair had been knocked over. Used to be in the front of the desk, and it was on its side. The room was neat, except for the out-of-place furnishings. And the bed's frame was pulled 10 to 12 inches away from the wall. And one end of the red rope was still tied to the left bottom leg of the bed, with the same complicated knots that bound Rebecca's ankles and wrists. From there, the tow rope crossed the room, went through the door, out onto the balcony, over the rail, where it descended to the point where Adam said he had to cut it to get the dead woman down.
Well, I mean, the whole point of why would you tie it around the bed? Why not just tie it over the rail? That seems way too complex. Like it would be easier just to tie it right to the balcony rail.
Wouldn't it?
I think so. I can't see any reason why you'd tie it to a bed, which isn't a stationary object.
No. Who's to say when you jump, the bed didn't go across the room and you end up on the ground?
With the bed on top of you.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
The French doors to the balcony were almost closed when the police arrived. The door on the right was latched. The wrought iron railing looked to be about 36 to 42 inches high. So it was high enough so that a woman, even when intent on suicide, and who herself was just over 5 feet tall, might well have had difficulty getting over it. With her ankles and wrists bound behind her, she would have had to hop to the railing, somehow hoist herself up and over, and more than likely would go down head first. Right?
It's very strange. I mean, the more we talk about it, the more unlikely it seems.
It does. Now, the balcony was dusty, but there was one complete set of footprints etched in the dust. When they were left there was impossible to determine. 2 small feet, pointed outward, so that their separation formed a V, had left the impression. There was one other print, half of a booted foot.
Well, and that booted foot turned out to be from a policeman.
Okay.
So we can rule that
So
out
we'll
from
take
meaning
care.
anything.
All right. Now, according to Adam, Rebecca had a T-shirt wound around her neck and then stuck down her throat. So really,
that's even more strange than tying your limbs. What are you afraid you're going to call for help?
what's with the T-shirt?
Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So is this to make sure that she couldn't change her mind and grab onto something, keep herself from screaming?
I guess. It doesn't make sense to me.
No, it doesn't make sense to suicide experts either.
No. But regardless, in September, her death was ruled a suicide, which surprised a lot of people.
Most everybody.
The sheriff presented a video of a young woman about Rebecca's size, tying the complicated knots around her hands and then slipping them off before putting them on behind her back. So they also said they were unable to do handwriting analysis on the note because it was block printing. But they concluded that it was a suicide note. But Rebecca's family didn't accept this finding at all.
Yeah, they complained that no one had ever interviewed them about Rebecca's mental state. Now, they said she was raised Christian and would not commit suicide. They also pointed out that Rebecca was very modest and would not hang herself nude for everyone to see. She did sleep nude, so her family is of the belief that she was grabbed from her bed, possibly while she slept.
And maybe she ran outside because her feet were caked with garden soil from outside.
Dna, Max's mom, also questioned the findings that Max had died from accidentally going over the rail while riding his scooter. It would have been difficult for him to reach the speed that could cause such an accident.
Well, we've been over that, but I could still see how he might get caught up and go over.
I think it'd be difficult. And I know you said that it's a thick carpet, so maybe that came to an abrupt stop and he went flying. No.
One idea is, what if he was kicking the soccer ball and it got caught in the chandelier and he decided to take the scooter and try and hit the ball off the chandelier with his scooter and fell over?
Yeah. No, I think that's reasonable.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
not, because the scooter was found with him.
Yeah, but the scooter could have already been on the floor. We're not sure.
Yeah. But I think he was trying to do something with the chandelier. So there was a forensic pathologist who wrote that his opinion, so a more reasonable scenario was that Max had been assaulted by another person near the banister. Also, the location of his injury that was found on post-mortem exam would make it very unlikely that he would have been able to speak when Rebecca came to his side.
Yes, I guess Rebecca told the police that he said ocean when she went to his side. But that could have just been like air escaping or something, and she might have taken it that way.
Yeah, because his spinal cord had been separated from his brainstem.
Well,
There wasn't anything going on.
yeah, but I guess what Dina was trying to do in the beginning is say that Rebecca was trying to suggest that the dog tripped him
Yeah,
when she had actually done something. But, I mean, now even Dina says that she doesn't think Rebecca had anything to do with it, so
right.
I don't think that's really an issue.
Now, meanwhile, with the help of Seattle attorney Ann Bremner, who had offered her services pro bono, the Zahau family investigated every aspect of Rebecca's death. So Dr. Maurice Godwin, a private forensic consultant hired by Bremner, said that death looked like a ritualistic killing.
Okay. And what about the pathologist we heard in the intro?
So this is a Dr. Cyril Wecht. As he said, he's been in a long career, 56 years.
He's very well known. We've talked about him before.
Yeah, he first became well known for questioning the Warren Commission's finding about the assassination of Kennedy. But he wondered about the tape residue found on Rebecca's legs.
Well, that is extremely strange, especially because the tape wasn't left there. Because if she did it, she wouldn't have been able to get rid of the tape.
Nope.
So that, to me, is just outrageous that they would call it a suicide.
I know. It sounds very far-fetched.
It does.
So another private investigator hired by Bremner, Paul Ciolino, summed up the investigative team's conclusion nicely when he said of the investigation, "It didn't pass the smell test. It stinks."
So you liked that. Okay.
It's a concise summary, isn't it?
Well, it gets to the point.
So in January 2012, so we're almost half a year or so later, Bremner's legal team sent an 18-page letter to Deputy Attorney General Julie Garland of the California Department of Justice. In this letter, they asked that Rebecca's case be reopened, citing the panel of experts. Now, Jonah had also written to the DA's office asking that it consider reopening the case. Their request was denied. Now, 6 months later, Dina Shacknai and her attorney appealed to the Coronado police to reopen Max's case. Again, they declined. So the Zahau family hired attorney Keith Greer, who would represent them in a civil suit, which was first filed against Dina, her sister Nina, and Adam Shacknai. But after the discovery of a video of Dina at the Children's Hospital during the time Rebecca died, Greer removed Dina and Nina from the suit, and he did apologize to them.
Yes, well, first the Zahau family had this idea that it was a plot to kill Rebecca, and it was carried out with Dina, Nina, and Adam all together and in on it.
Nothing like a good conspiracy theory.
Yeah, but they did drop that. So Jonah hasn't really said a word about anything since Max and Rebecca died. He's remarried and tried to move on with his life. He did have one official statement that was released in conjunction with the San Diego County Sheriff's report way back in September 2011. It's really the only statement we have from him.
Yeah, he said that Max was extraordinarily loving, happy, talented, and special. He brought joy to everyone who knew him, and we will miss him desperately. Then of his girlfriend, he added, Rebecca, too, was a wonderful and unique person who will always have a special place in my heart.
So these were two young people. This is really a sad story for both of these people and the people that love them.
It was. Now, although Dina once suspected that Rebecca might have been involved in Max's death, she no longer believes that.
Right, but she did say that she thought there might be someone else in the house who did it. So she's not totally accepting the accident-suicide story either.
No, and she's not obviously accepting the likelihood that Adam was the perpetrator.
Not exactly, no.
So while Rebecca's family was making arrangements with a funeral home in St. Joseph, Missouri, Jonah spent his time at Max's bedside. Now, Max had never awakened from his medically induced coma that once had seemed his only chance to recover. He was brain dead, and probably had been so since shortly after he fell. He died on July 15th, 4 days after the accident. On July 17th, Jonah released a statement to the media. Despite heroic efforts on the part of the paramedics and hospital staff, Max was unable to recover from the injuries.
Yeah, so What about the physicians? I keep coming back to this, right? He fell, and we think it was like a hyperextension of the spinal cord that caused his spine to just become detached from his brainstem. Is that how you described it?
That's what happened.
So the doctors should know there's no saving him at that point.
They should. I guess the only way, if they didn't know, I guess I could kind of see that. If they did the imaging studies and they didn't take it down to the spinal cord, they just went as far as the brainstem.
Okay.
I suppose they might not ever notice it. Because otherwise, if they knew it was present, there's no way they're going to be at all encouraging to the parents that he could possibly recover. And they would have let him go sooner.
Right.
So I guess the only thing I can think of is that they didn't know about it.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. I guess so. So his organs were donated to children, which is a good thing. Everything but his heart, of course.
Well, yeah, it had gone at least half an hour without having a pulse. So
there was tissue damage.
Muscle damage to the heart. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, soon after Jonah put the mansion on the market, because obviously the property held nothing for him but heartbreaking memories.
Oh, God, yeah. You imagine? I wouldn't want to go in there at all.
I wouldn't set foot in the place.
No. So there was that reenactment that was done of Rebecca's death by a news station, and they used a bed that was the same weight, tied to a punching bag that weighed the same as Rebecca. They tied the rope to the bed, dropped the bag off the balcony, and Rebecca's bed only moved 7.5 inches. But in the reenactment, the bed moved 36 inches. So the only explanation for this I can think of is that maybe in real life, Rebecca's bed had been in that room for a long time, and the legs were kind of set into the carpet, and maybe they wouldn't move as easily. What do you think of that?
No.
Really? You disagree?
Yeah.
Okay, explain.
That's the same thing as your theory that little Max on his scooter came to an abrupt halt because of the pile of the carpet.
So this is not going with physics.
No, it's not.
Well, there might be more friction resistance.
Maybe if the legs were more set into the carpet. But I was thinking, even before they did this, when they talked about how the bed had moved just a few inches,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, this is at least 100-pound woman who jumped over a balcony. It should have moved more. Yeah.
Well, that's just based on your opinion, though. You don't have anything to back that up.
No, just a reasonable opinion. So they also found that the dirt on the balcony wasn't a match for the dirt on Rebecca's feet. The dirt on her feet was soil from one of the gardens. Now, I'm not sure exactly how they could tell that, but I'll leave that.
I think they can. I think they can tell that kind of thing. Don't you watch Forensic Files? They can identify where dirt comes from.
Okay.
Yep.
Dirt's dirt.
No. Dust on a balcony is different from dirt in the garden.
Oh, sure. I'll go with that.
Okay.
But I'm not sure I could. Well, you say they can.
Well, maybe not specifically, but you can tell what region and,
Okay.
based on all different things. So what about Adam's 911 call? I tend to want to just say you really can't predict how someone's going to act when they make a call. Do you hold that against him? Do you think that could be used against him?
I don't hold that against him.
No?
And I agree. If you believe his story, he gets up in the morning and the first sight he sees is his brother's girlfriend hanging. That kind of flipped me out, wouldn't it?
I would think so. There are experts that have listened to his tape and pointed out different things he said. As far as saying, I got a girl here who hung herself. I don't know. Just the way he worded it, I guess. But
yeah, and the fact that he didn't mention that her ankles and wrists were bound or that she had been gagged with a T-shirt or that she was nude.
That's kind of strange.
I don't know.
Maybe not the nude, but wouldn't you mention I had to pull a T-shirt out of her throat if you're working on talking about giving CPR?
Yeah, maybe I'd do that. But, the basic thing I'm trying to do is say I found this woman hanging and I need EMTs over here right away.
But if they're going to say start CPR, I think I'd mention
Yeah.
I had to pull a shirt out of her throat, kind of thinking there's probably not a good chance.
I don't find that too much of an issue with it.
All right, so that's not a big deal.
No.
What about the tape?
They're going to come over and find all this stuff anyway. He didn't make any attempt to hide things.
What about the 3-legged table that he said he got on to cut her down? I mean, it had to be very unsteady, whether it was broken.
We talked about that. So if it was broken to begin with, you're not going to be standing on it. And even if it wasn't broken and he puts the table there and then stands up on the table and a leg breaks, he's going to have trouble. I guess the only way is if it supported him and he had succeeded in cutting her down and then the leg broke.
So what about fingerprints and DNA?
Well, they didn't find any, basically.
Pretty much.
The rope, the knife that Adam said he used to cut her down, no DNA or fingerprints. The suggestion was that the person who did the cutting down was wearing gloves. And they did find a pair of black gardening gloves, but they showed only a low level of a male DNA that was impossible to identify.
Well, I mean, it would have to be wearing gloves or wipe it down. I mean, he handled the knife.
He admitted he handled the knife, right? So he has no, and there's none of his DNA on there.
Wouldn't make any sense for him to be wearing gloves, though.
It wouldn't, would it?
No.
Okay.
So the private investigator hired by Rebecca's family appeared on Marcia Clark's show about this case also, and he was certain that Rebecca was murdered. Now he is working for Rebecca's family, sure, so you have to, put that into the mix when you think about what he's saying. But he says that there were several neighbors he spoke to who heard screams that night and said they were never interviewed by police.
The police, for their part, said they never followed up on those reports because the screams occurred more than 2 hours before Rebecca accessed the voicemail on her phone. And it could have been coming from teenagers in the direction of the beach.
Yeah, but maybe it wasn't Rebecca who accessed her voicemail. Maybe it was the killer.
True.
Now, the investigator also pointed out, like you did, that Adam was supposed to be there to comfort his brother Jonah. So why wasn't he at the hospital? And if he was too tired to go to the hospital, why is he looking at porn? I mean, that's just really weird to me.
Well, he
sounds bad.
He might be a really weird guy.
I know. Doesn't make him a murderer, but...
And maybe that's a way to calm himself down.
You never know.
Right?
Right.
And also, what about the knots on her wrists and ankles?
Yeah, we talked about that. Now, Adam was a tugboat captain, so that's a red flag right there for me.
It is for me.
We talked about Marcia talking to that nautical knot expert who said that whoever tied them had to be very skilled with knots to do that. Pretty much physically impossible that events happen that way.
According to the expert, yeah. And like you said, no fingerprints or DNA were found on the knife that Adam said he used to cut her down. But they found Rebecca's fingerprints on another knife that was in the bedroom. And police said this was the knife she used to cut the rope that she used to hang herself. The interesting thing about this, though, is that her fingerprints were on the sharp side of the blade, not on the handle. Then there were 2 fingerprints found on the bed frame up near the headboard. One was that of a child who's not identified or unidentified, and the other one they don't know whose it is.
And there have been a lot of people in that house, so that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Now, there was some black paint on the ropes on Rebecca's hand, and of course the note was with the black paint. And the paint came in a tube. The tube was tested and had no fingerprints or DNA. Except on the top, right on the lid, there was Rebecca's thumbprint, which kind of, I hate to say it, but it almost kind of seems like someone did that on purpose. Because that's not where you'd expect to find fingerprints.
Well, only that fingerprint.
Right, exactly.
No other fingerprints on the tube, except on the top.
Yeah, like maybe someone just forgot to wipe down the top.
So what about the footprints on the balcony? They had prints of her heels, but not her toes. So if she's hopping around with her feet bound as she's getting ready to go over the balcony, why wouldn't there be full prints?
Well, or at least like shuffling or hopping prints. Like
right.
Tracks in there, trying to drag your feet through.
The police thought that was evidence that supported the suicide theory.
Because there were no other prints on the balcony.
Right. Then we have no DNA, the top of the balcony railing, the bedroom doorknobs, the door where the writing is had no DNA, balcony doors had no DNA, interior doorknob on one balcony door did have a small amount of male DNA, but not enough to identify. Then was the note from the killer or from Rebecca? The Zahau family had analysis done on the writing. They looked at the door and took pictures of the note. They had legal forms that had been signed by Adam. He printed out his signature, which made it possible to compare his printing to the note's printing. They also had several samples of Rebecca's writing. So Adam's printing did seem more similar to the note on the wall than Rebecca's, but there wasn't enough samples to make a conclusive determination.
No, and handwriting analysis is iffy at best. That's not really a science.
Yeah, I don't know if it's iffy at best, but block printing would be really difficult to match.
So police were probably right with that they couldn't really determine anything with that.
Right.
But I don't think you could really just accept it as a suicide note based on that either.
No, you can't.
No. So it's just this past April when jurors determined that Adam Shacknai was responsible for the death of Rebecca. Jurors in the wrongful death lawsuit voted 9-3 that Adam's actions caused her death.
This is a civil trial.
Yes.
Not a criminal trial.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. So they found that Adam owed Rebecca's mother, Rebecca Zahau, over $5 million in damages.
Yeah, but police still haven't charged him with the crime.
And so far right now, San Diego County Sheriff's officials said they stand by the original investigation, but at the same time they're willing to review any new evidence that might have come out of the civil trial.
Yeah, so it hasn't even been 2 months, so maybe something will come of it. Now, what Greer said in the civil trial was that Shacknai struck Rebecca on the head, sexually assaulted and strangled her, and then staged the hanging to look like a suicide. And then for his reason, for the motivation, he said it's one of the oldest reasons in the world, sex. Which I don't know, because there's no signs that she was sexually assaulted. For his part, Adam testified that he had nothing to do with her death, and Jonah testified that it was inconceivable to him that his younger brother had anything to do with her death. Of course, that's his brother. I don't know how much weight we can put into that.
Not a lot.
Not a lot, no.
I mean, I think from what we've studied in this case and looked at the evidence, particularly from Marcia Clark's TV show, the idea that she committed suicide is not correct. She was murdered.
It certainly seems that way, I'd have to say.
So, and if that's the case, if you accept that line of reasoning, who's the most likely suspect? That's Adam.
Sure, but that's a great distance from being able to say that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of killing her.
Right.
I think that's the issue.
Well, I'm going to be interested in seeing if anything over the next several weeks to months comes from the civil trial decision.
Yes, absolutely. Me too.
See what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, support for today's show came from Grove. Grove is an e-commerce company that makes it easy to discover the best natural products to take care of your home and family and makes sure you never run out of your favorites.
Well, as I've said before, I just love these all-natural products. And you know me, I hate going out to the store. I'm a real homebody.
You are.
So Grove is an ideal shopping experience for me. Any experience with no other human beings involved, I'm ready for and I like. The products are packaged in an environmentally responsible way. They smell so good, and they work really just every bit as well as my old brands.
And then they deliver everything right to your door when you want it. Better yet, they offer free shipping and free returns with no questions asked.
Love that.
Grove has brands like Method, Mrs. Meyer's, 7th Generation, Real Simple, plus their own flagship products to choose from.
Sign up for Grove Collaborative at grove.co/brewery, and you will receive a $30 Mrs. Meyer's gift set for free with your order of just $20 or more. That's grove.co, not grove.com/brewery. Grove makes it easy to have a happy, healthy home. So before we move into feedback, I'd like to thank our listeners, our Tie Grabber members, our Patreon supporters, and all of you who send us feedback and suggestions. We've had such a great abundance of intelligent, thoughtful feedback, and I really appreciate it. Also, the suggestions are really great. Give us a lot to think about. We have a huge pile of suggestions that we're going to use someday, right?
We're never going to run out, that's for sure.
That's right.
So if you would like to add some small support for the podcast, and if you'd like an extra episode to listen to once in a while, you can support the podcast by joining Team Tie Grabber at tiegrabber.com or becoming a patron at patreon.com/TieGrabber. True Crime Brewery. Now, as a member, you'll get access to our 20 current members-only TCB episodes and the new ones that we release every month. There are some pretty good episodes in the members-only cast, like our 4-parter on O.J. Simpson, our coverage of the Tina Watson case. If you recall, she's the young woman who died while scuba diving on her honeymoon. In that episode, we have a really fascinating interview with a scuba diving expert who was involved in the U.S. trial.
Yeah, he was really good. And what do we have coming up in our members only? I know we have the murder of Jill Cahill coming up in June.
And then we have Bitch on Wheels coming up.
Yeah, it might have a different title by then, but sure.
Probably.
Yeah, but it's kind of a Black Widow type story, which are always fun. And when you offer us support, you're going to get a little gift too, right, Dick? What do I send them?
Right. We'll send you a bottle opener or a snifter, depending on how much you're forking over to us. I shouldn't put it that way. I also like to throw in a few more pieces of TCB swag, stickers, magnets, coasters, etc. Just remember, when you join, it can take a few minutes to get your login email. So if you don't see it in your email, check your junk folder. Sometimes it ends up there because of the software Jill uses.
And of course, there are some other ways to offer support. What else can people do?
Well, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. You can participate in the Facebook group, True Crime Brewery Fan Discussions. And if you take a few minutes to leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast, that helps out a lot.
All right, thanks, Dick. Now we'll get to feedback.
Okay. I'm not sure how much longer your poor old voice is going to be lasting, so I'll start. This is a case suggestion from Mary H. She says, I have a suggestion for a podcast. I can't believe I haven't seen more about this, like on Dateline with Dreamy Keith Morrison. Oh, you and Mary are sisters, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
Or on 48 Hours. Stephen Allwine from Cottage Grove, Minnesota, tried to hire a hitman to kill his wife using the dark web. I didn't know his wife personally, but she had a dog training business out of her home. And in 2015, I went to a competition she was putting on in Minnesota. Those who knew her were sure that her husband did it. Turned out he was having affairs on Ashley Madison. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. The really creepy thing was that after he killed her, he went to pick up their 9-year-old son at his grandparents', then he sent the child into the house first to find his dead mother.
It takes a really special slime bag to do that, huh?
It does.
That's awful. Who did that? Oh, it was that doctor who killed his wife in the bathtub and sent his little daughter in to find her, remember?
Yeah.
I have a comment on the surgeon's wife from Alana. Many circumstantial cases use inductive reasoning and Occam's razor. You go to sleep at night and the ground outside is dry and bare. You wake up in the morning, see snow on the ground, and use inductive reasoning. We'll conclude it snowed overnight. Oh, Jill, not sure where you're going with your concern about Robert Birnbaum having redeeming qualities through his good works. Putting aside the psychopath, the anger, the violence, the animal killing, which is all super horrible, he helped people. The horrible deed was killing his wife and hiding it, and leaving her family and friends in limbo for years. He almost got away with it. If you were judged on the worst thing you ever did, and you had murdered a loved one and hid it, you should be judged. We're not talking lesser crimes here. Otherwise, some people out there would proceed to do lots of good works, to cover up such murders and then seek an easing of justice. So I think, Alana, yes, you make a very good comment. And part of that there, I was just taking the role of the devil's advocate. But it is something that goes through my mind.
Well, and you remember that I disagreed with you.
Yes.
When we talked about that.
Absolutely.
No amount of good works are going to make up for the fact that you killed somebody.
Exactly.
Okay.
I was just thinking it from a purely philosophical, detached point of view. If you come into the world and you do no good or no bad, and you leave the world the way it was, or if you come into the world and you do one really bad thing and a bunch of good things.
I think you're just digging yourself deeper here.
Okay.
Let's just leave it at being judged on the worst thing you ever did and leave it there.
Well, I think her good point here is that we're not talking lesser crimes, right? It's
Right.
about the murder.
Right.
And I totally think she's right.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, comment on the surgeon's wife from Bass 13 Mary, or bass. Bass fish or bass drum? Bass guitar.
I'm thinking bass, but...
Okay. Sorry, Mary, I butchered that. So Mary says, I love Dr. Stone. Is this the same doctor who came up with that psychopath gradient scale of intensity? I think it goes to 25. Well, actually, Mary, in our research, Michael Stone, who is a forensic psychiatrist and professor at Columbia, has cataloged and classified evil acts into a 22-point scale. This was for his show on the Discovery Channel, Most Evil. So ranging from justified homicide to prolonged rape, torture, and murder, his scale includes names that have haunted the public's dreams. Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ed Gein. In his Big Think interview, Dr. Stone explained the breakdown of his scale of evil, which loosely mirrors the structure of Dante's circles of hell in the Divine Comedy. The first group, after justified homicide, covers impulsive murders by those who are not actually psychopaths. The middle of the scale includes those with a degree of psychopathic qualities, including grandiosity, superficial charm, glibness, manipulativeness, deceit, callousness, and lack of remorse. And numbers 17 through 22 deal with the truly psychopathic, especially those involved in sexual, serial homicide, and torture. Stone also told us what it is like to be inside the mind of a serial killer. More than 90% of them are psychopaths and sadists, but what drives them to kill varies from person to person. Some of them are loners, incapable of sustaining romantic relationships, who will rape the woman and kill her to destroy the evidence. Others are seeking revenge, says Stone, even if the real source of their anger, a parent, for instance, is projected onto other victims, as with Tommy Lynn Sells in Texas. Stalkers tend to be a more heterogeneous group, but they are often people who are hungry for attachment but know no bounds. There's no brake system preventing them from bothering, pestering, and sometimes even harming the object of their interest. Young people tend to have poorer braking systems than older people. Now his cutoff is 20. But there are some children who develop with no sense of empathy or compassion for others, a group that Stone calls callous, unemotional youth. These children will almost invariably become psychopaths.
Which is really sad, because then you're talking about children who are really unable to be saved from becoming this. There's no treatment. Is that what we're to take from that?
Right.
That's really sad.
We've had some discussions of the point system that Stone has used.
It's fascinating to me. So I have another comment on the surgeon's wife from Elisa M. He strangled a cat. Kill him. He deserves the death penalty. As for the superficial, weak wife, well, that's sad, but sometimes you get what you really ask for, especially because she really sounds like a BPD case. They always push the needle to the red. It's a thrill. If you don't want to get eaten by a lion, stop going into the lion's den wrapped in bacon. So that's really harsh, Elisa.
So this is tongue-in-cheek, isn't it?
I think a bit. I hope so.
Okay. I have another comment on the surgeon's wife. It generated a lot of discussion, didn't it?
That was a fascinating case.
And being judged by your worst act. This is from Georgia B. So she says, Hi, Dick and Jill. My answer to the question about a person being judged by the worst thing they do is that it depends what that thing is. If you steal things, but then stop stealing and live a good life, you're judged as an okay person. Murder is such a horrible thing, and something that no one comes back from. Now, Jill brought up an interesting point about characters in TV and movies redeeming themselves for murders. An example is one of my favorite characters from my favorite movie/short story, Red, in The Shawshank Redemption. It's even in the title. The difference from real life, of course, is that the victims were unnamed and unknown. We spent the whole story getting to know Red as a kind, old man who was nonviolent and remorseful. It's just not real. Besides that, the circumstances of Gail's murder were compounded when he cut her up, hit her, and never admitted to it. He can't show remorse if he won't even take responsibility for the crime.
Okay, so she's pretty much on the same side as Alana.
There we are.
But I think the TV thing is interesting for me as someone who watches a lot of movie and TV. And the character was played by Morgan Freeman, which of course made him likable right there. But even in the book you like him. What do you think about the whole idea of in fiction, how people can be more redeemable like that?
Well, as George has said, these are unnamed and unknown victims, so we don't know anything about it, and that makes a difference. So suppose we learn from reading the book or the novella or seeing the movie that Red kidnapped a woman and tortured her and raped her repeatedly and then killed her. Then he's not as redeemable, right?
No, not at all.
So I think it's easier to achieve redemption when you don't know the whole story. Just all we do know is that he's a nice old guy.
Yep. Okay, well, we have a comment on the same case from David in Augusta, Georgia, and he's looking at a different aspect, which I find really interesting. After having worked with surgeons in both research and in a hospital, I am surprised more haven't been caught doing something really bad. I believe most, if not all, surgeons are sociopaths of varying intensities. That being said, they do perform a very necessary function in society. Just be sure to hone your reflexes for when one has a meltdown over a bad needle driver and throws it across the OR to bounce off either the floor or the wall and land wherever, like the back table contaminating everything already laid out. I'm going to take a wild guess and say that David was a surgical assistant.
That could be, huh?
Yeah. So David goes on. I've seen it too many times. The most educated and highly paid person in the room acts like a 3-year-old. However, do prosecutors really get to just make shit up and get someone convicted based on what they imagined happened? I'm not saying Birnbaum is innocent. He probably did kill his wife. But at the same time, how many false convictions have there been of innocent people based on the incorrect guesses and imaginings of prosecutors? I think in this case the prosecution got it right, but when they're wrong, they destroy someone's life and allow the guilty to roam free. I'd be less apprehensive about the justice system if they relied more on actual evidence and less on what I think happened was this. Would a prosecutor want to hear his surgeon say, I think it's your gallbladder gone bad, when the truth is it's his liver? Actual provable facts do matter. So let's first address surgeons being sociopaths.
I'm sure that also is a little tongue-in-cheek.
Yes, I hope so, because that's kind of crazy.
Everyone has stories.
But it sounds like this is someone who worked with a surgeon, or more than one surgeon, who had temper tantrums.
Yeah, but I've worked with pediatricians who have temper tantrums.
Yeah, we've all met a few of these guys.
So,
Usually guys, I have to say.
I would.
Yeah.
And, they've thrown things and fussed and screamed. So it's not just surgeons.
No, it's not. We can't say that at all.
No.
But the second paragraph, that's what I'm more interested in, is prosecutors creating a scenario, which we've seen many times.
We have. And I'm kind of ambiguous about this.
Yeah, because we see it in the surgeon's wife, but we also see it in this case we're just doing today. That they're making up a scenario of what happened with Adam, Shacknai, and Rebecca.
They are. And, they're trying to take what they know and build a story. And you go from there, right?
Yeah, but I don't know if that's the right way to do things. That's not factual.
But I think if you are looking for what's the simplest or most likely explanation for what happened, then you arrive at that conclusion.
Yes, but can you convict someone beyond a reasonable doubt based on that?
I think you can.
Well, maybe you can. I think in Birnbaum's case they did. I think they got it right. I agree with David. I agree with you. But it makes me wonder if in other cases there are some false convictions. With this happening, there has to be.
I'm sure there are.
I think it's something that could get out of control easily.
I don't know that I go that far. I think there certainly are circumstances where someone is convicted of a crime that they didn't commit, and there's circumstances where they were rightfully convicted. You hope that the right ones far outnumber the wrong ones.
But I just think you have to be careful about making up a scenario. Here's what I think happened. I think that's a really good point when you don't have the evidence like that.
Well, you have to always come up with a scenario. And whether you have circumstantial evidence or hard evidence, you have a tale of how this could have occurred.
Well, that's a good point, Dick. I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah, you're right.
So I think his concern was that you're making convictions based on circumstantial evidence and not hard evidence.
Right.
But we know that they should be judged equally, right?
Equally? I don't know, really?
Circumstantial evidence, I think, is as much evidence as fingerprints and DNA.
Okay. But not eyewitness evidence.
Well, no, we don't like eyewitnesses.
Okay. Well, we could go really down the rabbit hole on this one, but I'll just thank everybody for their comments because
we'll keep these in mind.
And these just make for some fascinating conversation. So I just wish we had everybody in a room with a beer where we could just go over this stuff. I could do it all night.
We could do that.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening.
I'm putting you down for the night. I'm going to load you up with throat lozenges, drugs, put you to bed.
All right. Tuck me in.
Okay.
We'll see you next time at the quiet end.
Bye, peeps.
Bye-bye.